Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, it's been a little while since we've visited our friend Griffin, the Armchair Historian. I know he's been working hard on a new game that's coming out that looks fantastic, and I'm really excited to start playing it. But until then, I thought we'd take a look at one of his videos, and this one caught my eye. It's from 6 months ago. It's called What Happened to France After Napoleon. I'm a big fan of Napoleonic history, but I don't know as much about that aftermath, after 1815, after Waterloo, after the restoration of the monarchy, up until the 1840s when you have that period of revolution in Europe. What was going on during that time? So I'll put the link in the description so you can check it out and see all of the Armchair Historian's fantastic content. It's got 2.5 million subscribers now. Well deserved. Let's dive into this one.
On the picturesque Ile d'Aix, off the coast of western France, Napoleon Bonaparte spends his final days inside his beloved country. After his defeat at Waterloo, he hoped to escape to the United States.
Yeah, so if you think about it from Napoleon's perspective, he really was so much better off just staying on his initial exile in Elba. It was a much better situation. He basically still got to live a pretty nice life, got to be in charge of that island. Way different story when he goes to St. Helena.
The escape is not to be. Instead, he surrenders to the Royal Navy, which takes him to England and later to St. Helena. As the emperor drifts out of view, his legacy continues to shape France for decades to come.
Yeah, that's true, because he didn't just conquer territory. He didn't just win battle after battle and win wars. He instituted fundamental change in laws, in how the countries were governed, in how institutions operated, and I'm sure we're going to talk about some of that stuff.
Three monarchs will try to reconcile their monarchism with the legacies of revolution and empire.
I can't help but think of the line from the end of Hamilton where Thomas Jefferson comes out and says, his financial system is a work of genius. I couldn't undo it if I tried, and I've tried. Some of what Napoleon instituted remains in place to this day in some form.
Each one of them will fail. As Napoleon's defeat approached during the War of the Sixth Coalition, the victorious Allies decided to restore the Bourbon dynasty to power. King Louis XVIII, the brother of the executed King Louis XVI, would rule France under a constitutional monarchy.
Well, what happened to Louis XVII? He was the son of Louis XVI and never took the throne.
The new king was forced to balance the legacies of both pre- and post-revolutionary France. Louis XVIII was aware of the political situation in France. He realized that France could not return to the absolutist Ancien regime as it had existed before the Revolution. As Napoleon's rule collapsed, the French Senate invited him to the throne on one condition: that he accepted their constitution and rule as a constitutional monarch.
This is one of those moments where, and it happens repeatedly throughout history, Napoleon had it happen to him, where you have a moment where a monarch, a ruler, a president, or whatever, the person is the head of the government or the state, has an opportunity to have their power curtailed but remain in power. They say no, and it ends up costing them the power they had.
However, Louis rejected the Constitution and issued his own charter instead. It was very similar to the Senate's constitution, promising many revolutionary ideas like religious tolerance and freedom of the press. However, by issuing his own constitution, Louis made it clear where true power lay in the new French kingdom.
You're going to get freedom, but don't mistake where it came from. It came from me. That's what he's trying to communicate.
The charter was his gift to the people, not the other way around.
And keep in mind that the United States, when it declared its independence, which with help from France, and France then has this forever connection to the United States because of that, and their revolution is connected as well. the United States said that these are inalienable rights that come from our Creator. They don't come from government. They don't come from a monarch. They're just inherent in who we are. And here you have the monarch trying to say, no, your rights come from me.
Was a product of the Ancien regime. Although he did not understand the new France, he pragmatically sought to find a middle way between the pre-revolutionary order and the newfound liberties. The king kept many high-ranking Napoleonic judges and officials. These men had demonstrated their competence under the empire. And
give him credit for that, because in other situations, you have similar things happen. Had a police officer going down the street with his siren going. In other situations in history, you have similar things happen, and they just clean house, and they take, competent or not, you were part of the old regime, you're gone. And he doesn't do that. So that can backfire, obviously, if you leave people the infrastructure in place. But Napoleon's not coming back at this point, so that threat isn't really there.
Louis actively maintained the policy of unite, forget, forgive. One of the king's closest advisors declared, "Whoever served Bonaparte in the interest of France has served the king." Additionally, Louis maintained much of the Napoleonic Code, and its administrative reforms provided the monarchy with a powerful means to enforce its will.
Give him credit.
Many of the politicians who entered the legislature in 1815 were ultra-royalist conservatives who felt a sense of nostalgia for the Ancien regime. The legislature swiftly repealed revolutionary laws, which most notably included the right to divorce, and banned revolutionary symbols like the French tricolor flag. Domestic advisors and foreign representatives persuaded the king that these extreme policies alienated many in France, who were still attached to the accomplishments of the revolution.
Right, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Throw out the stuff that doesn't make sense or that's extreme, but still recognize that a lot of people feel that way.
He dissolved the chamber 1 year later, and ruled mostly with more moderate royalists, known as the Doctrinaires. King Louis XVIII pursued a moderate course, but he could not fully reconcile the order of the Ancien regime with the legacies of the Revolution and Napoleon. As early as 1814, many in France openly undermined the Bourbons' regime as Napoleonic idealization took hold of the country. Although the Bourbon Restoration embraced several revolutionary and Napoleonic changes, it resisted many more. Contrary to the Revolution, the Bourbons limited the franchise to just the wealthiest, richest men, about 1% of the people.
And this is a time in history when Europe, especially, even in the monarchies in Europe, is moving toward a more inclusive government where they're giving more and more voting rights to more and more people.
A reactionary church propagated the values of royalist traditionalism over revolution as one of the most powerful allies of Bourbon France. The Bourbons systematically aimed to eradicate all memories of the revolutionary and Napoleonic past.
I like the little Men in Black reference there with the flashy thingy that makes your memory go away.
They criminalized any verbal or written endorsement of Napoleon.
See, now you're going too far. You left people in place, you embraced some of the Napoleonic ideals, but now you're having that inevitable backlash against all things Napoleon, and it's going to backfire on you.
Suggestion of altering the succession line to the French throne as a political crime and imposed strict censorship laws. The government even instituted a national day of mourning to mark the execution of Louis XVI by revolutionaries as atonement for France's past sins.
Yeah, you probably just want to leave that one alone and not go there. Sometimes it's better not to talk about something.
The Bourbon search for legitimacy was thoroughly undermined by Napoleon's legacy. After Louis was restored in 1815, France was occupied by the Allies for 3 years. The occupation provoked widespread resentment in French society. A combination of economic frustration, social discontent, and patriotic pride coalesced into the figure of Napoleon. He became the image of a heroic emperor, symbolizing freedom, self-realization, the struggle of the common man, and glory. Whereas to them, the Bourbon symbolized a shameful imposed yoke of royal tyranny.
So this is, this is all recency bias, right? They overthrew the monarch in Louis XVI. They go through a period of revolution, bloody revolution. That leads into the Napoleonic Wars. Napoleon, takes them to great heights, but then has a catastrophic fall after Russia and the Battle of Leipzig and all of those things, and then culminates in Waterloo. He's been exiled. They default back to the Bourbon monarchy, and now that's not looking good. And so now they're longing for the good old days that weren't as good old days as you might think.
While the former emperor stood for French patriotism, liberty, and even the revolution itself, Napoleon's legend reverberated throughout France. People illegally celebrated Saint Napoleon on August 15th, while they refused to celebrate the royalist holidays. Seditious objects, like images of the revolutionary rosettes, caps, and banners, popped up everywhere.
And see, you could have avoided all this by just don't make it illegal. Say, you know what? I'm doing my best here. We're going to have an inclusive government. You don't have to like me, but I'm what you got. And then, don't criminalize people longing for something different.
Tricolor flags flew on church towers, a symbol of defiance against the hated royalist clergy. Bizarre rumors popped up about Napoleon's return. In one story, Napoleon's return was heralded by a newborn who immediately upon birth cried, "Long live the Emperor," 3 times. Songs commemorated the Napoleonic glory days, while many royalist celebrations were interrupted by cries of
"Te souviens tu," we remember you. Interesting.
"Long live the Emperor." Anti-Bourbon agitation regularly turned violent. In the immediate aftermath of the Bourbon Restoration, hardline monarchists were directly opposed by ardent liberals and Republicans. High-profile assassinations, rebellions, and a foreign war only exacerbated the deep rifts that continued to exist within French society. Violence between royalists and anti-royalists started immediately after Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo.
You gotta be like, if you're French, you're like, okay, it's been 40 straight years of being involved in some conflict in one way or another. When do we get a break?
Royalist mobs, furious that the French people had so willingly abandoned King Louis after Napoleon's return, were resolved to purge the French state, who they believed to be traitors. Jacobins, Republicans, Bonapartists, and even Protestants were persecuted. Hundreds lost their lives during mob lynchings in southern France, while prominent Napoleonic generals were assassinated. Although many liberals sought a working compromise that would avoid absolutism, dictatorship, democracy, and anarchism, some were more radical. There was an armed uprising in Grenoble in 1816, a rebellion in Lyon in 1817,
what a brutal time
and
to be
even
French.
a failed assassination attempt on the Duke of Wellington, who led the Allied occupation of France. 2 years later, a liberal conspiracy in the army was unveiled. Alongside these revolts, secret societies dedicated to liberalism sprung up all over Europe. The conservative European order grew increasingly paranoid that these liberals were in cahoots with other liberals throughout Europe, and that the liberal network was part of a massive conspiracy to overthrow their order. Bourbon France, alongside the other powers of the Congress of Vienna, paranoidly tried to suppress these tendencies.
And this is the choice that people in power always have to make when these things happen. Do I crack down on it, or do I maybe listen and come up with a compromise? Sometimes one or the other is the right way, but inevitably we can look back in hindsight and see when they get it wrong.
Rigorous surveillance and guilt by association. In 1820, a political event shocked France. The Duc de Berry, the king's cousin, was assassinated by a Bonapartist. Many Napoleonic and liberal agitators celebrated and called for the assassination of the king as well. Politically, however, the assassination had caused a backlash. The liberals were swept out of power and replaced by hardline ultra-royalists. They used the next year to quickly consolidate political control over France, and thanks to political manipulation, they soon controlled all but 17 of the 428 seats in the French legislature. These ultra-royalists presided over an invasion of Spain, known as the Expedition of the 100,000 Sons of St. Louis.
It's it's a good strategy. Let's focus on a foreign war to unite the people. In the beginning stages of the American Civil War, this was actually something that was suggested by Secretary of State Seward. He went to Lincoln and said, you know what, we don't need to fight a civil war with the South. Let's go to war with Europe. Let's go to war with France. Let's go to war with the British. Fight the French over Mexico. Let's do something that unites us against a foreign power, and we'll stop focusing on our differences and start focusing on some common enemy.
France intervened to support the Spanish king, Ferdinand VII, in his struggle against his liberal legislature. Aside from resistance by the Spanish liberals, the government also faced significant domestic opposition. French liberals met the armies at the border, waving the tricolor flag and singing the Marseillaise.
Yeah, so your attempt is to unite, right, and to stand up for people who have the same values as you in France, down in Spain, if you're the French monarch. But the problem is you're already dealing with a great deal of negative feelings toward you from liberals, and now you're going to go to war to help support conservatives in another country. That's only going to anger the liberals in your country even more.
Urging soldiers not to cross, poets declared solidarity with the Spanish liberals, and French liberals urged soldiers to mutiny. In the end, however, the conservatives were victorious. After the Battle of Trocadero, Spanish liberalism was crushed, and the ultra-royalists claimed a great propaganda victory for their cause. Nonetheless, their hold over France remained ever strenuous. Louis XVIII died in 1824. His brother, Charles X, succeeded him. In contrast to his brother, Charles did not pursue moderate policies. Rather, his contempt for French liberalism and the legacy of the Revolution and Napoleon led to a political crisis.
Talk about not reading the room at all. I mean, yeah, it's part of the mindset, though, that you grow up believing that you have a divine right to rule and that you've inherited the throne legally and by God's authority. You tend to ignore the peons, the common people.
And ultimately, a second French Revolution. Already well before his coronation, Charles maintained a clear ultra agenda. Together with his prime minister, Joseph de Villela, Charles' policies pushed a series of reforms that seemingly brought France back to the days of the Ancien Regime. Suffrage was further restricted to only the ultra-royalists. The immigré.
At a time when other countries, as we said earlier, are moving toward a more inclusive government, you're becoming more restrictive.
People who fled the country during the revolution received financial compensation for the trouble the revolution caused them. Many saw these people as traitors to France for their opposition to the revolution. The French bourgeoisie denounced the law as a bounty to the emigrants for their treason to the revolution. The greatest social opposition to Charles' regime stemmed from his religious policies. Throughout the 1820s, the church gained enormous influence.
Remember, during Napoleon's time, the church initially, during the French Revolution, the revolution and into Napoleon's time, the church has lost a lot of its power. The clergy are one of the great powers in the country early on, and they actually basically become a completely secular state. They even turn churches into temples of reason. So they kind of go really far in the opposite direction. And now France is kind of back into giving the power to the church instead of finding that happy medium like Napoleon did, where Napoleon, well, not a deeply religious man himself, recognized the importance of the church to the people, and he would use that to his gain while also kind of giving them what they wanted, but not giving the church too much power.
Schools and universities, liberal and Enlightenment thought was banned in favor of conservative Catholic education. In 1825, a law that made blasphemy and sacrilege punishable by death further riled public sentiment against Charles.
I can't imagine why that would rile public sentiment at a time when people are kind of becoming more secular anyway.
And even sent some ultra-conservatives reeled from the law's severity. Thanks to concerted liberal efforts, Villela lost the 1827 election, and the French legislature was no longer monopolized by the ultra-royalists. The liberals were increasingly fearful of Charles' uncompromised hatred of the revolution, and of attempts to undermine the rights of Parliament. These fears were justified when Charles appointed a new ministry led by an ultra-royalist, the Prince du Polignac. In response, a majority of deputies quickly passed a motion of no confidence in Polignac. The liberals wanted to force Charles to choose ministers acceptable to them, and elections in July of 1830 made it clear that the electorate shared their view. Charles, however, saw the liberal threat as a prelude to revolution. He quickly invoked emergency powers and issued a series of ordinances that suspended freedom of the press, further limited the vote, and dissolved the legislature.
Let's see, can I compromise and keep my throne, or should I crack down and ensure that I lose it?
Although the 1830 revolution was also caused by economic and financial upheaval, the social reverberations of the 1789 revolution and Napoleon were instrumental in the political crisis. To many liberals, Charles had abandoned the Constitution, and with it, legal government. The revolutionaries were driven by patriotic, Republican, Napoleonic, and anti-clerical sentiments, all directed against Charles X and his out-of-touch policies. The king had forced a confrontation between the legacy of the Ancien Regime and that of the Constitution, with its revolutionary elements. Within just 3 days, the Constitution achieved a resounding victory. After Charles abdicated, the liberals in the French Parliament proclaimed his cousin, Louis Philippe, the new king of the French. Although the new king came to power by riding on a wave of liberalism, he too would ultimately also fail to reconcile his monarchism with the legacy of revolution and empire.
And this is what shows why there's such brilliance in what is able to be achieved in places like the UK, where the monarchy did evolve with the people and they did make choices that led them. I mean, obviously going back to the 1600s, not so much. They beheaded a king. But after that, once you get into George III and George IV and William IV and Victoria, you're starting to see that the monarchy gets it. They understand that their role has to change.
At first, the new monarchy seemed to represent the final victory of the people over the Ancien Regime, a champion of constitutional liberty at home and abroad. Louis Philippe, the so-called citizen king, sought to consolidate the legacy of the Ancien Regime, the Revolution, and the Napoleonic era into one patriotic French history. For the new king, French history should inspire pride and unity in its people rather than division. The wonders of the Revolution and the Empire were on full display in the Palace of Versailles, now turned into a popular museum. After months of negotiation with Britain, Napoleon's ashes returned to France, where they were meant to serve as a unifying symbol of French greatness under the stable rule of the House of Orleans.
So I never had thought that it was just his ashes. I figured there were still bones and stuff left when they returned it, but interesting.
However, the legacy of the Revolution and Napoleon also continued to inspire opposition to Louis Philippe's rule. As 1848 approached, Republican desires, rooted in 1789, once more flared up.
Such a fascinating and important year in European history, 1848.
Poor urban workers complained about their living conditions, and the petite bourgeoisie demanded an expansion to the still very narrowly restricted right to vote. Ultimately, these underlying tensions exploded in yet another revolution, one that would lead to the creation of a second republic, one in which another Napoleon would rise to power in a popular landslide. in large part thanks to the sentiments of national pride, power, and public order that the Bonaparte name came to carry.
All right, that was good. We have covered some of this before, and I'll put a link up to that video here in just a second, so you can check that out. And hope you enjoyed that. Hope you learned a little something. I certainly did. Let's continue the conversation down in the comment section below, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching.